Hello, welcome to Gardener's World. Well, it's April. And whilst the April weather can make fools of us all, you cannot now deny that spring is truly here. Every single day, something new is appearing in the garden. And you can just feel the whole natural world bubbling with excitement. Now, this is the wildlife garden. And everything in this garden has been designed to encourage as much wildlife as possible. Now, one of the things I do in here, which I don't do in the rest of the garden, is leave it untouched all winter. We don't cut anything back, we don't tidy up, we don't weed, we don't do anything. But now we are genuinely in spring, we can cut back. But rather than take everything away to the compost heap, I'm just cutting these up roughly and letting them fall where they will. Now, this will do two things. They will eventually rot down, it will form a kind of mulch, and also provide cover. Because if you want to encourage wildlife into your garden, cover of any kind will be the best thing you can do. Now, coming up on today's programme, Toby travels to Cornwall to meet a gardener who embraces a unique set of challenges on his plot.
What's the one thing that people who can see perfectly well say to you that really gets on your nerves?
People of all disabilities, particularly blind people, will find that people either treat them like heroes. Oh, it's absolutely amazing. And then later on, it's like, oh, look out, don't stand on that plant. Watch out, oh, let me help you.
We'll meet a couple whose garden is almost entirely devoted to alpines.
I was a theatre sister, and it's all the little tiny instruments, and I think they just sort of go together, you know. It's just like little treasures all coming up through.
Carol will be visiting the garden of the late, great Beth Chatto to see how she tackled ground cover.
In most people's gardens at this time of year, the ground is dark and dank. There's nothing much to see. But with a careful use of these beautiful plants, the whole place can be transformed.
And I shall be dividing hostas and replanting them in a new border I've made in the damp garden, along with some ferns. And it's time to plant potatoes. Now we're in April, it's time to plant potatoes. And as soon as the soil is not cold to touch, then they'll grow. But with early varieties, first or second earlies, the sooner you get them in the ground, the sooner you'll be able to harvest them. And if you've chitted them, they will grow faster. Now, chitting, you take a seed potato and you put it somewhere frost-free but light. I put these on a windowsill 4 weeks ago, and you can see they've developed these stubby shoots ready to burst into growth. So by getting the shoots growing, that gives us, with early potatoes, up to 10 days earlier harvest. Now, this is a variety called Charlotte, which I absolutely love. But whether they're earlies, second earlies, main crop, whether you've chitted them or not, the technique is still the same. If you grow them in a raised bed, you just make a hole with a dibber and bury them. The traditional method, which I'm going to do here, is to grow them in trenches or furrows. And I've got this matted, and it's brilliant just for drawing back the soil like this. Now, obviously a spade will do the job just as well, but it's always fun to use a specialist tool. Now, along the bottom of the trench, I'm going to put some compost. Potatoes are hungry plants. They will respond to any amount of goodness you can give them. Okay, that's enough. Now, when you're planting potatoes, the spacing will have a lot to do with the ultimate crop. The wider apart they're spaced, the bigger the individual tubers will be. Now, obviously, with early potatoes, you don't want great big ones, so they can be planted closer. About a foot apart with the chitted shoots facing up like that. As potatoes grow, they do have a tendency to push up a bit. So to that end, I'm going to draw the soil up into ridges above them. Make sure that there's plenty of soil over the top, because if the emerging tubers get exposed to light, they turn green, and then that's poisonous. So at all times until you harvest them, you want to keep them in the dark underground. Now, I grow vegetables and I have my own methods. I tend not to measure anything very much, but I get by. But last summer, Toby went down to Cornwall to visit a vegetable grower who is very successful, but has rather a different approach to many of us.
Over the last 3 years on the outskirts of Falmouth, Andrew Hesser has been creating a garden. He's a passionate grower and, along with herbaceous borders, has developed a thriving vegetable garden where he's constantly experimenting and running trials. And he does all this without being able to see. Andrew?
Oh, hi, Toby.
I didn't expect to see you up a ladder.
Yeah, I just love it. Just, you know, just being in amongst this plant and the textures and the nice sort of crisp noise when you do that. And then you know you're doing the best for the bush at the same time. Yeah, it's wonderful. You've got to watch out sometimes to get a few brambles growing up through there, so I've got to be a bit careful with the fingers.
Yeah. I'm here for the grand tour.
Oh, OK. Well, I'd be really pleased to show you around, Toby. This is my pride and joy, the broad beans.
Am I all right getting in and having a
Please
look
do,
around?
yeah, come on over.
I'm going in, Andrew, right.
Yeah, I mean, they're wonderful texture.
Yeah.
When they first germinate and start growing, when they're 15 centimetres tall, the stems are round and then they gradually square up. So that I really enjoy seeing that and feeling that happen. And then I can instantly know when I'm weeding which is a broad bean and which isn't because of the shape of the stems. And they're quite strong when they grow big. They've got the texture of the stems, which evolves as the plants grow, and then you've got the aroma. I don't think it's to everybody's taste, but I brush my hand on the leaves, and it's got a kind of very, very earthy, not very sweet smell, but I just intoxicated by it. And again, when I'm weeding, if I'm not sure if it's a weed or a young broad bean plant, just brush my hand on the foliage and smell it, and that's just lovely.
It smells of summer to me, actually.
Yeah, that is a good description.
In Andrew's garden, ornamental plants like hydrangeas offer a sensory experience too.
So we've got them, you know, when they're nicely in bloom.
Yeah.
This is one of the smaller ones. We have got lots of taller ones. But then also when they start to go over and you get that nice crunchy head on them, you just imagine that whole thing is just one big, almost a sphere of dried petals and crunchiness. And I just really like the sound and the texture.
Yeah, they do. They're drawing me in like a bag of salt and vinegar crisps.
I've heard they're your favourite.
Not a bad crop.
No, there's a sort of medium-sized crop this year. I have had better, and some years absolutely nothing, of course. And one of the things I like about the plum tree is the nice texture of the trunk. It's sort of smooth, but then it's got a kind of pattern to it, hasn't it?
Yeah.
I really like that.
Exploring Andrew's garden with him really brings home the difference in our focus. Then there's the navigation, something that I take for granted. But again, Andrew employs a different set of tools and techniques.
Right, so this is my central slab, and I'm surrounded now by courgette plants, which I can just get to just by an easy reach out.
Oh, Andrew, this is a feature that I think health and safety would would have something to say about.
What now?
Are you learning to snowboard or something? What's going on with this seesaw?
Because I had this board here, and I thought, well, hang on, I'm going to be tripping over this post. I'll make myself a little seesaw. So it's just a little bit of something different, really. It's an experience, isn't it? And then this gets me over to my climbing beans area. So it's just for variety. Now, yeah, I stuck my spade in there because behind there's, I would imagine, the arbutus.
Andrew has had little success taking cuttings from his Elaeagnus, so I've offered to give him the benefit of my experience.
Always get it below that bottom bud of the cutting. Yeah.
So, oh, okay.
About there, yeah, where your thumb is there, on your left hand. On the bottom of the cutting, if you point it away from your hand and then scrape down all the green underneath this sort of pithy bark,
Yeah.
and that green is full of what's called meristematic tissue, which can turn into roots. And because you've exposed it, when you stick it in the pot around the edge,
Yeah.
you're more likely to get a cutting to root.
It can often seem a bit bewildering because you don't know whether you're doing the right thing or not. 15 years ago, I just gave up gardening altogether because it just got too much. It was just too intense. And I just kind of fell out of love with plants and things. And I look back now and think I missed out on so much there, because in the last 3 years, I've kind of realised that if you have a whole new attitude and a whole new approach, you kind of learn from that and you're more meticulous.
I mean, you've made your garden your own here, Andrew. What's the one thing that people who can see perfectly well say to you that really gets on your nerves?
I mean, many people of all disabilities, particularly blind people, will find that people either treat them like heroes. Oh, it's absolutely amazing. You know, you can use a pair of secateurs and take cuttings. That's amazing. And then later on, it's like, oh, look out, don't stand on that plant. Watch out, or let me help you, or be careful with that. You know, if you're scrambling on the ground to find your trowel, the last thing I want is somebody coming and going, it's over there on your left, it's on your left. You know, no, shut up, I'll find it myself. I'm just looking because my hand's on my eyes. I don't need somebody with sight to suddenly shortcut the process and then show me something. It kind of takes away your sort of humanness, really.
So he can identify cuttings and seedlings, Andrew uses data transfer technology, similar to that used in contactless payments, which allows him to read and write labels.
Cerinthe seeds, 6 seeds sown on 24th August 2021.
At the back of Andrew's garden is a feature which people from my home county of Devon and the inhabitants of Cornwall often argue about.
Is the Devon Bank at the end of your garden new, Andrew?
Did you say Devon Bank? Cornish hedge. This is your traditional Cornish hedge.
I knew that would get a reaction.
Yeah, this is a tradition across Cornwall, used on farmers' fields. I don't know if there are many gardens that have them, so I feel very, very privileged to be the custodian of the Cornish hedge. Lots of good nutritional growing environment for plants.
Andrew has planted up his wall with osteospermums and cotoneaster, and today he's adding some cyclamen.
You mentioned earlier that you nearly gave up on gardening. Well,
yeah.
Listening to your plans and all the things you got going on, clearly it's been a good thing that you didn't.
Yeah, I'm really, really pleased. It's an endless activity because there's something new every day, and then there's the planning element and the looking forward. I'm just so happy that I've taken up gardening again, I really am. It's like a constant joy, a constant hobby and activity.
Andrew's pleasure and joy in gardening just shows you that you find the way that works for you. And if it works, it's the correct way. Coming up through the mulch of the cottage garden are these shoots of Dicentra spectabilis, bleeding hearts with their lovely bell-like flowers of pink and white. I wish I had more, and one way of making more is by taking cuttings at this time of year. Now, most cuttings you take, particularly in spring, are softwood cuttings, and you take it from the tip. However, some plants take better from basal cuttings. Dicentra's one, delphiniums are another, lupins you can do, and the technique is to get your knife right down at the base of the plant, just under the soil. So you take a little bit at the base of the plant and just cut at a slight angle like that. Now, like any other cutting, you want to be quick. So, have a bag, pop it in, and that will extend its life until you can pot it up. I might just take another while I'm about it. You don't want to take too many from the same plant, but I might get one more from here. There we go, perfect. Right, I will take these now to pot them up, but I've got a few things to get ready. So while I'm doing that, let's go and visit the first of your gardens, which takes us across the Irish Sea.
Welcome to my sunny garden retreat here in Ireland. My name is Richard, and I live here with my wife in our newly built mid-terrace townhouse in Cork City. I will try to show you a snapshot of our ongoing transformation of our small backyard since we moved in here just over 3 years ago.
The garden is essentially west-facing, and at the bottom of the garden there is a native Irish hedge with a fruiting cherry in front, and on the south-facing wall masses of beautiful early flowering clematis. At ground level the daffodils have already gone over, but here you can see the absolutely dark purple flowers on the tulips, and pinks here as well. And then over here we have the latest project, which is in the relatively shader part of the garden. I'm particularly pleased with this lavender, which was planted only last year from 3 small plants, and this magnolia, which was also only planted last autumn.
As a retired engineer and a newcomer to gardening, the COVID lockdown has provided me with an opportunity to develop my more creative side. But it's simply a work in progress, and I still have plenty more to do. So, thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoy your garden as much as I enjoy mine. Cheers.
Well, thank you, Richard, for sharing your garden, and I certainly enjoy mine. I'm mixing up plenty of perlite into a peat-free compost. And when you're taking any cutting, there are 2 things that are essential: oxygen and water. You actually don't need any nutrition at all because there are no roots to feed it. You want to grow the roots in order that it can feed. And perlite improves drainage, and that lets the oxygen in, but also soaks up water and releases it slowly. I've got the Dicentra cutting here. It has no roots, so therefore it can't support very much extra growth. So I'm going to trim off that leaf there and this side one here. And if there's any slightly dead material at the base, that could come off, because if it's dead, it may rot, and then that will cause problems. I'm going to use a dibber, so we're not forcing it through the compost, but bury it about half its length. I will water that and then put it on the bench, which I'll mist. Now, if you don't have a mist propagator or even a propagator with a covered lid, you can simply put it in a polythene bag, a food bag, water it, put it in the bag and just tie the top and put it somewhere bright. And then as the water evaporates, it will collect on the inside of the bag and keep the air moist. And all you have to do is untie it and water it every few days. And you'll know when the cutting has rooted because you'll see new growth. You can also use the same technique very successfully on dahlias. When you're taking the cutting, you take a shaving of the tuber as well. Now, Longmeadow, along with, I guess, most gardens, is a real mixture of plants and planting styles and techniques. But there are some gardens where the gardener's passion where a particular group of plants always comes to the fore and completely shapes the way that the garden looks. And that's certainly the case of the garden we visited a year ago down in Hampshire.
I'm Ben.
I'm Paddy.
We're in our garden, which is primarily alpine.
There are alpines for every aspect. I have a sunny side, a shady side, a damp bit. They're so perfect, aren't they? You can fit a lot in into a small space as well. My mother, she used to take me to these wonderful alpine nurseries, and you've only got to see them for so long and you just think, oh, I want to grow that. So over here, the little water lily plant, Sanguinaria canadensis, is one of the first alpines I fell in love with. My mother had a path down her back garden and I used to walk down it, and this time of year there was like little ballet dancers all with their tutus on all along, and it was just delightful. Ben and I have spent many beautiful trips up the mountains so you can see where they grow naturally, and then that gives you a real idea when you come home where those plants love to live. That's what I'm creating. What I've seen in the mountains, I'm trying to emulate in my garden.
I bought the house for the garden, and that gave Paddy a blank canvas when she moved in 2010.
I say what I need to grow and what conditions I want, and Ben says, oh well, you can have that bit up there, and I filled that up very quickly. Look at this darling little soldanella. It grows up in the Alps, pushes through the snow. Really a lovely little treasure that comes up every year. Look, this beautiful little narcissus. But it went and seeded down here. Absolutely delicious. They're so nice, aren't they? I love getting up first thing in the morning when the sun's out, and I walk around the garden before anybody's got up. And then you see all the little treasures that have poked their noses up or growing, and that's a joy. This is the woodland area. What I love about it is that it's so natural looking, because now that everything's seeded, things that you didn't expect to come together are just looking really perfect. We've got Trillium rivale, and now it's been split and they're all round, and all the Athroniums are flowering. And then you've got Jeffersonia diphylla just going to open. Why the plants do so well here is that we collect the leaf every year and make beautiful woodland compost, and then it's mulched with it and the plants thrive in it. You don't have to worry if you haven't got leaf mould. Any lovely garden compost will do, and you could add a little bit of grit and sand to make it a bit more open. I was a theatre sister, and it's all the little tiny instruments, and I think they just sort of go together, you know. You just look at it and you think, oh, it's just like little treasures all coming up through. The damp ditch, I have to say, when I first moved in with Ben and it had just been developed, my mind went on overdrive of what I could plant in it. You've got some really lovely little golden saxifrages growing, as well as the fritillary Thunbergii does really well here. As you can see, it's a taller alpine. It grows in wet meadows and it comes into growth after the snow melt up in the mountains. And that's what's so lovely about this area. You know, we do flood, but you have to realise it doesn't harm the plants. It's magic, isn't it? I love it.
Paddy had a takeover bid on the whole garden. However, I insisted that I retained a certain amount of control over certain beds. So we do have his and her beds.
And his and her plants.
His and her plants. And primarily I will look after the ponds surround as well. But most of the alpine beds are down to Paddy's.
Tulipa cretica is one of my favourite bulbs. The shape, the delicateness, the leaf, the flower, and when it opens, the stamens inside are just so beautiful. This is Fritillary Dronoskii. It's the first year I've managed to flower it. It's the tiniest little flower, the size of your baby fingernail, and just such an exquisite flower with the most beautiful inside. Now this is to my really special area. I love this area. And with the dry stone wall, I've planted all little plants, cyclamen and little anemonellas. They're all over. And they might look really delicate, but they can go over winter. It has a summer canopy of the trees behind me so that it doesn't get full sun at any time. It's lovely having a hobby that you both enjoy. And, you know, I don't have to be out here all the time. And you know, Ben's out here. Yeah, where would we be without having this beautiful garden? It's magical, isn't it?
I can't help but notice that the language that Paddy was using, talking about the plants that she loved so much, is one that you hear from everybody who loves alpines, because they're always described in terms of being treasures, of jewels, of being precious. These perfect miniatures, and I really do get that, even though I grow very few alpines myself. However, I do grow fritillaries, slightly different from the alpine ones that she has, and they share that element of this extraordinary, intense, jewel-like perfection in their checkerboard pattern. These, of course, are the snake's head fritillary. And whilst most alpine plants really like good drainage, snake's head fritillaries need to be wet. They are the plant of water meadows, and it floods here. And there's almost a tide line where they stop growing in this garden. If they get a good winter flood, they love it. They don't mind if they're dry in summer, but they must be wet in winter, and that gives them all that they need to produce these incredibly intense, extraordinary flowers. Now, still to come on today's programme. We'll be visiting a gardener who is a self-confessed fern addict.
You've got a plant that basically survived the dinosaurs that you can put in your garden that will lend itself to any setting. I'd say I've got issues where ferns are concerned.
And Carol will be looking at glorious ground cover in the garden of Beth Chatto.
This whole garden is absolutely packed to the brim with the most superb examples of ground cover.
I sowed these sweet peas last October, and I've kept them over winter in a cold frame. And the reason for sowing sweet peas in autumn is simply to ensure that you get really nice, big, healthy plants. Because the bigger the plant, particularly the root system is, early in spring, the quicker it will grow away, the bigger it will grow, and therefore the more flowers it has early in summer. And the early in summer is critical, because once we get to July, their instincts are to set seed. So if you can get them flowering well by the end of May, early June, then you're going to have a really good display. Now, if you haven't sown sweet peas yet, it's not too late, but it's going to be too late soon. Sow them this weekend if you can, and you should have a good harvest later in summer. But these ones, I would expect to flower in May. And this is a variety called Matukana. And they have purpley magenta bicolour flowers, and above all, a fabulous fragrance. Probably the best scented sweet pea that you can grow. And I sow 3 seeds to a pot and plant the whole pot at the base of each support. Nice rich soil. Sweet peas respond really well to food and water. Now these have been pinched out. If your sweet peas that you did sow in autumn are really long and straggly and they all get twisted up together, don't be frightened of just reducing them by a half. With your finger and thumb, just pinch it out, and that will encourage it to be bushy. And the bushier the plant, the more the side shoots, and it's the side shoots that will produce the flowers. So that goes in at the base there. There we go. You will have to tie them in for the first month or so. I was thinking about the wonderful Beth Chatto the other day, whose books I refer to all the time. And I was also thinking, well, when was the last time I went to her garden, that marvellous garden she created near Colchester in Essex? And I realise it's over 10 years now, which is about 10 years too long, so I must go soon. But Carol was there just a couple of weeks ago. Lucky thing.
You've almost certainly heard the expression, right plant, right place. It's a mantra for gardeners everywhere, and where better to see it in action than right here. The phrase right plant, right place was popularised by Beth Chatto, one of the greatest gardeners of all time. Beth and her ecologist husband Andrew arrived here in 1960 and set about the overgrown wasteland, transforming it using plants adapted by nature to thrive in different conditions. But I'm here to look at ground cover plants, those wonderful plants that carpet the ground, making green tapestries. In most people's gardens at this time of year, certainly in mine, the ground is dark and dank. There's nothing much to see. But with a careful use of these beautiful plants, the whole place can be transformed. This is the world-renowned gravel garden. Built, believe it or not, on a car park 30 years ago. Since then, it's never ever been watered, but because it's packed full of drought-tolerant plants, it's always a picture, full of colour, texture and form. Spilling forward onto the gravel at the front of this garden is this Euphorbia myrsinites. What a glorious plant, perfectly adapted to this situation. It comes from mountain slopes in Europe and all across the Middle East. And it has these wonderful serpentine stems. And if you look, these lovely glaucous leaves form spirals, and it's perfectly adapted to coping with just this situation. And running through it is this river of blue. It's Scilla. It's called Scilla lucilii, but its common name is Glory of the Snow, and it gets that name because that's when it emerges. As the snow begins to melt, up it comes in all its glory. This whole garden is absolutely packed to the brim with the most superb examples of ground cover, and none more so, I think, than this corner, with this lovely little periwinkle, and it makes the most superb evergreen ground cover. Of course, you wouldn't want it right on the edge of a path where you've got all sorts of little treasures, because it'd just grow too big and it would overcome them. but it's doing a very important job. These great dark green shiny leaves thrusting up through the centre of this are those of colchicum. Now, it won't flower until the autumn. People often call it naked ladies. These huge chalice flowers in purple and white, some of them checkered. And it's a glorious plant, but if it's planted in the open ground with no support, come the first heavy rain, the whole thing gets smashed to the ground. But that's not going to happen here, because this Finca minor is going to provide this lovely framework for it to grow up, and it will support it right the way through its flowering. From plants that appreciate the driest of conditions to those that thrive in the shade. Over here in the woodland garden, the ground too is absolutely smothered in plants, but it's shady as well. That shade isn't here yet, but as soon as this canopy fills in overhead, this whole place will be plunged into dense shadow. Meanwhile, these plants, which are so happy, are exploiting this brief opportunity to really do their thing. I think standout amongst them has to be this erythronium. It's Erythronium dens carnis, dog's tooth violet, and it's so called because its bulbs underneath the ground are just like canine teeth. Although they look so exquisite, they're actually very straightforward to grow. You can buy the bulbs in the autumn and plant them then. Anywhere shady, preferably between the roots of trees, or you can wait till this time of year and actually go out and buy a plant in flower. And all the green here from this beautiful foliage is sparkled with these tiny little daffodils. This is Narcissus pseudo-narcissus. It's one of our only 2 native daffodils, and it's the one that Wordsworth wrote so beautifully about. It's very easygoing, really straightforward. You can buy it as dry bulbs from a few specialist growers in the autumn, or you can get a pot full. If you do, put it into the ground and then don't deadhead it, because it'll set seed and start to sprinkle itself around, and before you know where you are, you should have a show like this. Deep in this woodland area, a most beautiful cardamine is wending its way through. Cardamine quinquifolia is a spring delight, and providing you give it the right conditions, it'll soon spread and make vast colonies. If we were to take it and put it into the gravel garden, it'd curl up its toes and die, because this is what it loves. A bit of shade, lovely woodsy soil with plenty of leaf mould or any organic matter incorporated. And that way you can enjoy these delightful lavender flowers right the way through the spring. Ground cover plants are like any other plants. All they need to thrive is the right conditions. And providing you acknowledge what the conditions in your garden are and choose plants that are going to love living there, you're going to have carpets of beauty all year round.
These are the daffodils that Carol was talking about, the pseudo-narcissus. And about a quarter of a century ago, we planted 10 bulbs, and gradually they've spread by seed. And for a few weeks at this time of year, they're just a joy. Part of the big revamp of the damp garden has been moving the path and making 2 new beds. There's the bog garden at the back, which I'll be planting up over the next few weeks, and a new bed tucked away in the corner where there used to be paving. And that's in almost permanent shade, but it's also damp because this area floods. So what we have is damp shade, and that is ideal for some of the plants I've taken out to create the new path and the new borders. Namely hostas. I've also got the shuttlecock fern, Matutia, and I will be adding some more ferns. Now, what we've done is dig up the hostas. Each part is quite big. Now, I'll be honest with you, I long ago lost the labels to these. I know that this is one of three. It's either Summon Substance, Snowdon, or Hosta Sibbaldiana, because those were the three we had here and that we moved. But for the moment, I'm not sure which is which, but that doesn't matter because I'm going to be planting all three back into that bed. But I'd like to subdivide that, and now is the time to lift, split, and divide hostas. Now, any sharp implement will do, although a sharp spade is probably the best of the lot. And when you're dividing a hosta up, particularly a largish one, think of it as slicing a cake. This, for example, if I divide into three, will work better. I'll tell you why in a minute. So we just get that like that and then stamp down hard on it. That's one, and then two. So what I have now is three wedge-shaped pieces, three slices of cake. And you can see that that is distinctly a triangle. And the reason why a triangle's good is because the most vigorous part of a hosta is the outside. And by planting triangular sections, you've got very little of the old inside and a maximum amount of the outer growth. And this time of year is brilliant. Before the leaves start to unfold, but after these very hard bullet-like points start to emerge from the roots. And it's worth doing this to any hosta, I would say about every 3 or 4 years. It revigorates it, it rejuvenates it, and critically, gives you new plants. Okay. So if I place them there, and this is a different variety, so we'll put that there. We've got another one of that sort, so we'll put this over here, perhaps. The crucial thing to understand when you're growing hostas is they do not like to be too dry. So if you've got very light free-draining soil, bulk it up with lots of compost and conditioner. And in a container, keep them very well watered, grow them in a really good, rich, peat-free compost, and give them a weekly feed of liquid seaweed. Planting is very easy, just a shallow hole, pop it in so that it's at the same level, so that the shoots are above ground, and that's all I need to do. It's as simple as that. Of course, there's more planting to do to fill this bed. But first, let's take another visit to one of your gardens. And this time, we're going to visit a young couple in West Yorkshire.
Hello, Gardeners World. I'm Matt.
And I'm Leanne, and welcome to our garden in Leeds.
It was unloved and full of rubbish when we moved here 2 years ago.
We've had to be really resourceful as we've started to landscape the garden. Today we thought we'd show you around some of the things we've done.
The soil in Leeds is really heavy clay, so we had to improve it quite a lot to be able to grow some vegetables. We created our veg beds with the lasagna method, with layers of shredded paper, grass clippings, whatever we had around. At the end of the growing season, we put in a mulch of garden compost and manure, and as you can see here, the soil is really improving already. Last year we got a really good crop of beans from this bed, and we grew the beans up this old swing frame that was already in the garden.
I've really loved watching the border grow and change over the season. The climbing rose was beautiful earlier in the summer, and now I'm really enjoying the sunflowers.
The planting scheme is by no means planned. We've thrown in any plants, flowers, seeds, and even vegetables that we've had. And it's been lovely to see the garden come alive with life and colour. And lots of wildlife, ladybirds, bees, moths, butterflies, and very recently we spotted a hedgehog who will hopefully help us with our slugs and snails.
We hope you enjoyed the tour and you enjoyed the things that we've been getting up to.
Happy gardening.
Bye.
Bye.
I love the energy and sheer pleasure that Leanne and Max clearly get from their garden. And I would say that if any of you get anything like as much delight from your gardens as they obviously do, share it with us. We'd love to hear from you. If you go to our website, you can get all the details of how you can do that. Now, I'm planting some ferns in amongst the hostas. And this is the first one. It doesn't look like anything now, but it's magnificent. Believe me, this is the shuttlecock fern. It grows really well here in the damp garden because it likes damp conditions, and it dies back in winter, but very soon we'll be putting out new fronds, and it will grow up between the leaves of the hostas, so I can plant it relatively close to them. But I do need to bear in mind that these hostas can really be substantial. Great big leaves which look fabulous but suppress plants around them. So you need something that is equally dramatic and forceful to rise above that foliage. And I've got a couple of other ferns here which won't do that. So I need to plant them away from the hostas to a certain extent. This is actually one of my favourite ferns. It's not like many ferns because it's not filigreed. It's got these flat, leathery leaves, slightly crinkled. But the hart's tongue fern is one of our British native ferns. It's evergreen and is ideal if you've got a dark, rather damp corner. So I'm going to pop that there. The third fern I'm planting is one I've never grown before. It's evergreen. It's the Western or American sword fern, and I've chosen it because it's got a slight silvery cast to its fronds as they develop, and that will pick up on the glaucous colour of hostas like Snowdon or Sibbaldiana. And I think we can put this at the back here, like that. Now obviously when you're planting like this, put them in pots on the ground, move them around, maybe go and have a cup of tea and think about it, and then the planting's easy and you get it right. Measure twice, plant once. When they are planted, don't forget to water them. I will give these a really good soak, and I would say anything that you plant at this time of year should be watered in well, whether it's raining or the ground is wet, water it in well. And my own love for ferns has steadily grown over the last 10 years, and now I really enjoy them and grow as many as I can. But my fern fanaticism doesn't begin to match that of Georgina Yates in her garden near Rotherham in South Yorkshire.
I absolutely love ferns. I think they're incredible. I am fanatical. You've got a plant that basically survived the dinosaurs that you can put in your garden that will lend itself to any setting. I'd say I've got issues where ferns are concerned. I'm a garden supervisor, so I garden by day and garden by night. My garden is like a fernery, basically, and in total I think I've got around about 200 ferns running through the garden. I really like the architectural qualities of the ferns. You can actually garden with one plant that has over 10,000 species in it, but also has many different shades of green. So you can create a paradise that has depth, height, structure, just from one plant. My love of ferns goes back to being a child. I suffer quite badly with hay fever. My sister and I used to play together in the woods all day long, and they were full of ferns, and it was one of the only areas where I could play and not actually suffer really badly with hay fever. My garden is long and narrow, so I thought, how can I make it appear bigger? I have a massive interest in interior design as well. Some of the tricks are to use things like big lamps on small tables so it makes it look bigger. So I kind of took my knowledge of interior design and I incorporated that into the garden. With my planting, I use a waterfall system, which is planting a group generally of 3 plants in an offset triangle and using 3 different heights, tall, medium and small. And I've done that by using the Miscanthus garganticus, then introducing the Crocosmia lucifer and then underplanting with ferns, and that's what gives you a bit more depth to your border. And then the other idea was to create long waves through the garden, because that acts as an optical illusion, because you feel like you've got to walk around things. I have 2 ferns in particular that I run through the garden. Do-gooders, I like to class them as. One of them is Dryopteris affinis, which is this particular variety. And then the other one is Dryopteris filix mass. They're easy to grow and they have a nice form about them as well. So these grow lovely and they're my kind of underplanting all the way through the garden. A lot of people do say they all look the same. To me, they all look totally different, and if you do put them all together, that's when you start to see the difference within them, because you get those variations in the shades of the green. And one of my absolute favourites is Dryopteris wallichiana, that has got almost dark green foliage to it, and it looks absolutely beautiful underneath the cordyline. I absolutely love this fern because it's a little bit unusual. It's a Crichtonium falcatum, which is the holly fern. I got this on a trip with my mum, which is why it kind of sparks a passion for me. And I saw it and I just had to have it, because I'm always on the lookout for a new fern that I've not got. And I made the mistake of putting it in the back of the border where I thought it would light the border up, and it got lost. So recently I've actually dug it up and moved it to the front of the border, and it's working so well here, and it's clearly very happy, and it reminds me of my mum, so it's a little beauty really. It is important to feed ferns, but they're not as fussy as most plants. The way that I look at it is, in their natural habitat, most of them grow under the canopy of trees. So in the autumn, when the leaves fall, you get that natural decaying from the leaves over the winter period, which also, by the way, acts as an insulation for the ferns as well. I try to mimic that in the garden. I allow the foliage to fall on the ferns through the winter. So that's one way I feed my ferns. So the leaves will decay down and feed the fern. And then you can use a liquid seaweed feed as well. My garden definitely reflects my personality, absolutely. I've got plants in there that are big, bold, loud, colourful in some ways. And I think the thing that I get the most pleasure from with my garden is that I know that I've done that, I've created that, and I've done it all myself.
I can't match Georgina's fern fervour, but I do love them, and it's a love that grows. There is something about ferns that is endlessly fascinating. Now, the grass borders are just starting to regrow, and it will take a little while. And I'm adding in slightly ferny fronds, actually. This is a fennel. This is a giant fennel. And at this stage, it seems fairly small and inconspicuous like the rest of the garden. But I've got one over in the bed at the back, and that is just getting going, and it will grow 10, 12, 15 feet tall with an incredible head of flower. They can die back after flowering, but there are always new seedlings coming up. So once you've got the parent plant established, then in some form or other, that will remain. This does thrive in full sun, so give it a sunny spot. It needs good soil, but also good drainage. That's the critical thing. Right, I'm going to plant the rest of these in the other beds, so I've got one really big one in each of these 4 beds. So while I'm doing that, here's some jobs you can do this weekend. Epimediums are a wonderful plant for dry shade, but their foliage does tend to obscure the delicate flowers that are at their best right now. So cut back last year's leaves at the base, and be very careful about this, because it's all too easy to remove some flowers by mistake at the same time. Then you can enjoy the flowers, and when they've finished, a fresh batch of leaves will soon grow. If you're growing your own tomatoes from seed, you should have healthy little plants by now. But they won't be ready to plant out, either in a greenhouse or outside, for at least another month, and probably 2. So pot them on. I'm using a 3-inch pot and a peat-free compost. Don't firm them in too hard, but just settle them in the compost, water them, and put them somewhere warm and protected so they can grow into nice, strong plants. If you're confident that hard frosts are now over, you can prune lacecap and mophead hydrangeas. Remove last year's flowers, going back to a strong bud, aiming to take off about 1/4 of each shoot. And when you've done that, remove any very old or damaged shoots right at the base of the plant, and then you can leave them to do their thing. Good girl. Come on. One of the most dramatic plants in the garden at the moment is this euphorbia. It's Euphorbia Caracias wolfenii. And it loves it here in the dry garden because the soil is so poor. I've also got it growing in other parts of the garden out of cracks in the wall and between paving. I've tried growing this in the dual garden and it doesn't like it. Apart from anything else, it flops everywhere because the soil is too rich. It loves bright sunshine, poor soil, and good drainage. So the dry garden is perfect for it. However, the truth is the rest of the dry garden is not doing so well. It needs a revamp, and I'm going to start that next week. But we've run out of time today. However, join me here at Longmeadow at 8 o'clock next Friday. And until then, bye-bye.